I didn't really care for this movie when it got announced, and as the MCU continued to falter and footage of this movie began releasing, I still didn't really have that much interest. It just seemed like a handful of underwhelming and forgettable characters, and Bucky, teaming up for an unknown reason. Upon release, however, the reviews were just insane. After watching only a single Phase 5 movie in theaters, I started to feel that pull again, the desire to return and catch the MCU on the big screen. I want nothing more than for this franchise to return to form, and honestly I think a lot of their projects have been better than public reception gives them credit. Not all of them, but I'm not as pessimistic as most. Everyone from genuine movie critics, news outlets, to your average Twitter user was raving about this film. Now I've gotten pretty good at tempering my expectations. After all, I did a shit ton of research, made a whole video, and got myself extremely excited for Thor: Love and Thunder, then even saw people calling it better than Ragnarok, only for it to giant turn out like that. Hell, Stephen King endorsed the Flash movie for God's sakes. That one hurt. And all of this is to say that I thought it was excellent. Yeah, no, the hype is real this time, guys. This is top 3 since Endgame, no question, and I probably wouldn't put it third. The opening sequence hooked me right away. So many of these films open with bombastic action or jokes, which is totally fine, but showing us a depressed Yelena longing for purpose, lonely, unsure of what to do next, throwing herself into her work that only grows her guilt and shame and barely tempers her demons. For this film, this cast, I'm so glad they decided to make her our main character. She's been someone I've always wanted more of since her introduction, and I left this movie feeling the exact same way. And then we get to the rest of the Thunderbolts, and the way they're introduced is so clever. The concept works great. It's perfectly believable that they would all clue in and decide to reluctantly work together. Because of how natural this all seems, it's so much easier to connect with each member of our ensemble and get invested in their motivations. Bob being there too, just some clueless little guy, fish out of water, was neat. It was fun. Even if Bob did have a hand in some of my problems with this film, but we'll get to that. I still liked him, and I thought he served his role really well. The humor throughout this escape sequence is integrated perfectly. The whole film, in fact, has a distinctly better version of the classic Marvel banter. Everyone has a voice here. Very rarely are there jokes because the script called for humor, rather that's what that character might say in that given moment. They're soldiers, they're mercenaries, they use humor for all kinds of reasons, namely to undercut tension, and they like making fun of the people around them, in darker and perhaps ruder ways while they're still warming up to each other. This escape sequence is borderline perfect, and it features only brief reprieves from the action to focus on either Bucky or Valentina, both of whom are genuinely interesting. I was pleasantly shocked how long this sequence took, and there are even reports that they considered making this whole movie a single location film in this facility. Could you imagine an MCU bottle movie? I'm happy with what we got, but man, that could have been really cool, and I think these characters in this setting could have worked really well given their backstories and personalities, but I digress. This film is broken up into 3 distinct chunks. The escape sequence, a phrase I need to stop fucking saying, the middle where they're essentially going from A to B and establishing their stake in the plot, and then the conclusion in New York. None of these 3 overstay their welcome, all 3 are compelling, engaging, and essential, and this whole film is just paced gorgeously. If you were sitting near me during the finale, you may have even heard me under my breath muttering, please end here, please end here, please end here, and guess what? It did. Thunderbolts contains one of my favorite MCU final scenes because it actually knew when to shut it down. Shit was interesting, we had questions, we had concerns, we wanted more. Fuck you, cut to black, that is perfect. Every chunk of this movie kept the locations to a minimum far more than your average MCU movie. The first and third acts have our heroes basically in a single physical location, which makes this whole film feel far more focused and intentional. Never relying on new, flashy set pieces to grab our attention, the characters interacting with one another, developing their feelings towards each other, themselves, and the narrative is more than enough. It is too bad the treatment Taskmaster got. I kind of feel like, had they given us a more competent version of this pretty well-liked character, well then she probably could have came along for the ride. There's no real reason she had to die, other than maybe having less characters to focus on. As it stands, Ghost was clearly the odd man out in terms of how much the movie focused on them, and even Red Guardian, while having a sizable role, was absent from essentially the whole first act. Maybe they thought Taskmaster would mess with the dynamic, but I don't know. That's one of few main black marks on this film. The last time we saw Taskmaster, we spent so much time almost redeeming her, giving her a new reason to keep living. One of our original character's final on-screen acts was helping her rediscover her life, only for us to see that she's still up to the same mercenary stuff and it gets her unceremoniously killed. Now that could actually be a really cool concept if they leaned into it and showed that that's where all these people's lives were going if they didn't get their shit together. But nothing really happens in that regard. There's only one moment later in the film where they talk about her and who she was, and it was great. That moment didn't need to be flashy or overstay its welcome, especially considering it was Yelena that this was centered around. In her shoes, I could totally see her being upset by it all and just going numb. And I doubt Ghost would want to get into the backstory of the person she just killed, especially considering she killed her on the orders of someone who's now trying to kill her and all her new friends. Concepts like these, giving us more time on the human side of being manipulated by someone you thought you could at least vaguely trust, the one person who is maybe giving your life just a teeny bit of purpose. I wish these themes were explored a little bit more, but the lack of exploration didn't make the movie worse considering what we spent our time with. I just think it could have been a nice addition. And one of the only other real issues I had with this film was in regards to our main big bad, Bob the Void Sentry, a character who I really enjoyed, to be honest. For starters, I think the clearest issue I had with him was during that middle chunk, where he essentially goes from a random guy to one very proficient in combat and suddenly in full control and confrontation expansion of his godly powers. It almost felt like, if there were to be a spot in this film that they planned on having some additional content but ultimately trimmed it would be right here. The movie's just like, nah, his hair is blonde now, they get it. He's good, he can turn people into void pancakes. I didn't love his backstory either, or at least I didn't care for the way it was presented to us. Now, I didn't want every inch of it to be spoon-fed to us, but offhanded remarks that he was in a study where everyone died except him, I don't know, it wasn't really enough for me to justify his universe-altering powers. I liked the line about giving the super soldier serum to someone like Steve results in Captain America, and giving it to someone as unbalanced and unstable as Bob gives us the Void, but again, I needed to see him be more off balance. There was a bit of a 180 in my eyes, where we start the movie seeing a relatively normal guy, maybe a bit dicey, but nice enough, funny enough, willing and able to help out, to the movie then telling us, oh yeah, he's a meth head, fucking piece of fucking shit. There was a lot of telling and not showing in my eyes, and even when we got into that final act and saw his trauma box and how he's disassociated himself from the Void, well, that almost makes him seem more balanced. He's separated himself from the mentally ill one, and Bob himself appears as a more or less regular guy. Just like with before, I had very little problems with what we were actually shown, but I do feel like we needed to be shown just a little bit more. I'm usually not big on flashbacks, but maybe a bit of content on Bob's life before the trial, what made him interested in trying it in the first place, other than a blanket desire for a better life. We get the tiniest of glimpses into his childhood, and who knows, maybe that was enough for some people. I have always been a fan of less is more, but I think we needed just a little bit more in this case for me to be fully sold on the overall psyche of our lovely Bob. Because he is super fun and charming. I was always so glad to see him on my screen. And the more I write about this, the more I find it a minor gripe at best, and the fact that I spent so long discussing it really only speaks to how solid the rest of this film is. I honestly wish they leaned into John Walker being even more of an asshole to help propel him to align with Valentina though. John would have worked perfectly as the representation of all the people in Bob's life who have cast him aside, found him annoying and in the way. As it stood after the first act, John was a dick but little more, Ghost saved him a number of times, and Yelena was lovely. Why would he feel so inclined to side against them? His Void persona being a metaphor for his mental health was fantastic though, and I loved everything revolving around that third act conclusion. I really like Bob, but I had more problems with him than some of the other characters, and I think we could have gotten an even better version than the one we were given. On that note, Ghost, the only member of the Thunderbolts who was given a noticeably smaller role, and I really don't think that needed to be the case. I was hoping as she grew closer to Yelena, she'd start to feel more remorse for her killing Taskmaster, which would eventually lead into her more outwardly wanting to leave the mercenary life behind, but we don't really get too much of that. Whether or not this may end up being the case for Ghost, I suppose we'll find out later down the line, but I wish the movie explored it just a bit more. She was still fun, very charming, I really want to see more from her going forward, which is not something I ever thought I'd say about a character from Ant-Man and the Wasp. So kudos to her for taking advantage of her more limited screen time and making us actually connect with her. US Agent, a name on par with the Mandalorian and Grogu in terms of how much I puke in my mouth at the sheer sound of it spoken aloud, makes his return, and man, John Walker's awesome. I think this movie helped remind us that we were all pretty damn into him when that show first dropped. Yeah, the show kind of got worse and worse with every episode, and John was done pretty dirty after he admittedly killed a guy in public in pretty brutal fashion, but still, we all found him so captivating and simultaneously likable and detestable. God, did he ever toe the line well during those first few episodes. The roller coaster ride was wonderful of instantly hating him strictly because he's Steve's replacement, then coming to find out he's a pretty darn charming young lad, but then oh no, Bucky and Sam hate him so we do too, and then the cycle just kept going. I do think he was given a raw but believable deal losing the shield after executing a man in the streets, but like, this whole show's sense of morality was a giant mess. You're telling me they would have stripped the shield from Steve if you watch Bucky get murdered by terrorists and killed one of the other terrorists?
You have to stop calling them terrorists.
That is the worst line in the entire MCU. Anyways, he always had a bit of an asshole edge to him, and I like that we got to see that become a more central part of his personality. More than perhaps many, his fall from grace is a sad one that I can really empathize with. I hope we get to see him and Bucky learn to grow and become something resembling friends, especially if that dynamic also crosses paths with Sam Wilson as Captain America now. Bucky himself is also treated pretty well in this movie, and I love that we got a line about his trauma instead of us going inside his mind and seeing all that shit he went through for the 100th time. The line of him saying, "Nah, I'm all good, no trauma up here," was way better. We've seen enough of his past to know how horrific it was. I like the vast majority of the aspects we haven't seen being left a mystery. His political foray is a bit strange, but I don't hate it. Gonna have to see a bit more of it before I develop harder feelings, but on the surface it's not all that different from other characters who take matters into their own hands outside their suits. I did find it kind of funny that Bucky, one of the most connected men on Earth with a plethora of highly dangerous and capable friends in every place imaginable, wanted to create a little strike force and thought, these few guys I just rounded up will do the trick. They weren't lying when they mentioned that Bob fellow after all. Bucky's dope. He's cool, charming, same old Bucky we know and love, and I think he got the exact right amount of screen time and focus. Same goes for Red Guardian, a character who could probably wear you down if we had him playing a main role throughout an entire film, but they do a good job of limiting his role to practically nothing at the start, then splicing him into the team with a well-suited role. Comic relief, leader of morale, and genuinely competent and helpful enough. He was the only real slapstick, more overt form of comedy in this film, but I think it worked well since it suited his character so well. His goal is to fit in with these guys, some of whom he looks up to. Of course he turns to humor. He wants them to like him. All in all, man, there's just so much to like. The finale, as I said, was spectacular, and I'm very eager to to see where we go next with the whole new Avengers thing. Perhaps they find themselves feuding with whatever squad Sam Wilson puts together and we get a Civil War style film. There would be more than enough of a difference to this dynamic to the point where it would still feel fresh and original. This is a tough movie to rank, which is always the case with long-standing franchises where you've seen the films you're comparing them to multiple times over the course of several years. I'm certainly going to wait a while before formally placing it, perhaps slip in a rewatch or two, but if I simply had to place it now, which I totally do because obviously why on earth do I have a YouTube channel if not to prematurely analyze and rank things, then I'd slide it in at number 11. The rest of my list remains clouded in mystery, though I'd love to share it with anyone who's interested in the form of a new video. Come to think of it, Thunderbolts does close out Phase 5, maybe it's time for a big ranking video. And if you're interested in that, or interested in any other of my channel's content and want to help support the channel, please consider subscribing. It goes a long way, and it's getting harder and harder to convince my fiance to let me upgrade my little gadgets to make these videos. She needs results, goddammit, and her bloodlust demands subscribers above all else. Likes and comments are also welcome. Thanks for watching. Until next time.